military aircraft in northwest of Meiji River. This is Chinese Navy.
In 2022, when the U.S. Navy's P-8A Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft flew over the South China Sea, it was suddenly warned by Chinese border patrols. They claimed that the aircraft had illegally entered what they referred to as Chinese territory. The aircraft was immediately ordered to leave the area. Later, another aircraft passing through the area received a similar warning. Journalists were present this time, and this is what the warning said. China has sovereignty over the Spratly Islands as well as surrounding maritime areas. Stay away immediately to avoid misjudgment. Overall, it sounds pretty standard for a country that warns when someone enters its airspace without permission. However, there's a catch. According to international law, this territory doesn't actually belong to China. And here's what the American pilot said over the radio in response to the Chinese. I am a sovereign, immune United States naval aircraft conducting lawful military activities beyond the national airspace of any coastal state. And he hasn't even mentioned that some of these islands didn't exist a few years ago. So what's going on here? I'll make myself some coffee first, and then we'll figure it out. A super unobtrusive reminder to hit the like button if you forget to do so. And thank you for understanding my wish to do you-know-what. So what's the situation here? Any country can expand its territory by creating artificial islands. To do this, the country usually sends special ships into the sea and instructs them to pour concrete directly into the ocean. They keep pouring until several completely new land masses are formed. According to international law, the one every country must obey, every country with a coastline has jurisdiction over the waters adjacent to its shore. This area is known as the territorial sea. According to the rules, this territorial sea extends no more than 14 miles from the baseline. The entire territorial sea is sovereign territory, though foreign vessels, both military and civilian, are allowed to pass through peacefully or transit through straits. But besides territorial waters, there's also something called the exclusive economic zone. It stretches from the baseline nearly 230 miles, and the state owns all the resources within this zone. So it turns out that when a country finishes building islands and declares them part of its sovereign territory, everything within 230 miles of those islands automatically falls into its economic zone. And international waters, which technically don't belong to any country, become the country's property. But although I described the order correctly in theory and everything seems to be within the law, the situation is a bit different in practice. The world works a little differently, and actions like these raise questions for neighboring countries and, of course, cause conflicts. The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea says that although countries are allowed to build artificial islands within their exclusive economic zones, these new islands won't possess the status of islands. That means no territorial sea, no change to the country's exclusive economic zone, nothing. The problem is, China has already done all of this. The islands are built and even developed. As of today, China has 20 outposts on the Paracel Islands and 7 on the Spratly. It also controls the Scarborough Shoal, which it appropriated in 2012 due to the constant Coast Guard presence. Since 2013, China has been carrying out unprecedented dredging work and building artificial islands in the Spratly Archipelago. Nearly 3,200 acres of new land have already been created, and China's presence on the Paracel Islands has been significantly expanded. As I've already said, other countries don't agree with all of this. This map shows the territorial seas of the countries with access to the South China Sea. These are the 14 miles I mentioned. This is what the exclusive economic zones of the countries in the region look like. Those vary 230 miles. And yes, in some places the zones of the countries overlap. Got the idea? Then let's move on. This map doesn't show the maritime claims on the Paracel Islands, the Spratly Islands, and the Scarborough Shoal because it's unclear what exactly the different countries want from them. But we've marked their location, and as you can see, all these disputed areas are not in Chinese territory. However, China claims the entire area outlined by a dotted line. That is about 90% of the South China Sea. Officially, the world learned about this on August 28, 2023, when China published an updated map of its territory. The 2023 edition of its standard map was posted on the website of the mapping service run by the Ministry of Natural Resources of the People's Republic of China. Yes, this is how official it was. A specific feature of the map is the presence of 10 dash lines around the South China Sea and the entire island of Taiwan. For the rest of the world, this area either belongs to other countries or is considered neutral waters. Although the International Tribunal ruled back in 2016 that China has no rights to this territory, Beijing ignored the decision and continues to insist on the legitimacy of its dash line because these claims have roots going back centuries. The first voyages across the South China Sea date back to the 2nd century AD, during the reign of the Han Dynasty, when emperors sent explorers and government officials to study other parts of Asia. Historical records show that the powerful Chinese dynasties at the time had almost complete control over the waters for centuries. And since the South China Sea was actively colonized by the Chinese in the past, it must belong to China now. That's the logic. Of course, a huge number of events have happened since then. Borders of countries have changed, wars have started and ended, but I won't bore you with a long history lecture. Let's focus on the latest changes. In 1947, the People's Republic of China published its national map, which included the 11-dash border of the South China Sea. This is 2 lines more than today. They mark the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam. Later, Beijing revised its national map, apparently backing off its claims to the bay. There were different reasons for this, including ideological ones, but the fact remains, in the early 2000s, an agreement was signed that officially set the maritime border between the two countries in the Gulf of Tonkin. As for the rest of the dashes, in China's opinion, it basically fixes the injustices and mistakes that have been historically made against it. While other countries claim that China's territorial demands are encroaching on their land, China just builds as many islands as it can. Yeah, despite the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which sets out the rules for dividing maritime territories, and which was signed by China too. But the South China Sea seems like too tempting a prize. Besides China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Brunei are also laying claim to it. China regularly objects to any actions by U.S. military forces in the region, and the U.S. keeps sending its ships there. But what's so special about this little patch of the ocean? Well, first of all, it's the resources. By the end of the 1970s, the countries of Southeast Asia had discovered potentially profitable oil and gas fields. The estimated 11 billion barrels of untapped oil and huge volumes of natural gas beneath the South China Sea sparked conflict among the claimants: Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Besides oil, the South China Sea is rich in marine life. This abundance is due to the large flow of nutrient-rich waters from the land and upwelling in certain areas of the sea. As a result, the sea is a major source of animal protein for the densely populated region of Southeast Asia. Although the South China Sea covers just 2.5% of the Earth's surface, it's home to some of the richest reef systems in the world and over 3,000 local and migratory fish species. The fishing industry continues to play a crucial role in China's economy. Fishing revenues make up about 3% of the country's GDP and bring in up to $279 billion every year. It's estimated that around 7 to 9 million fishermen work in China, operating more than 450,000 fishing vessels, which together make up one of the largest fishing fleets in the world. One of the sources, by the way, claims that China's expanding its territory to give fishermen new opportunities. Still, China's driven by more than just its huge fish resources and maybe large oil and gas deposits. Well, at least it's not only about that. Other economic reasons are more essential because by the end of the 1970s, the South China Sea had become one of the most important trade routes in the world. Around $5 trillion worth of goods are transported through these waters annually. To be more precise, according to the UN Conference on Trade and Development, about a third of the world's sea trade passes through this waterway every year. Tens of thousands of cargo ships carry around 40% of China's trade, a third of India's, and 20% of Japan's trade with the rest of the world. All these cargo ships are heading toward the Strait of Malacca, which connects the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Essentially, this is almost the only active route. Just open up a world map that shows ships at any given time, and you'll see something like this in that area. Every time a person from Europe or the US orders something from China, its journey passes through the South China Sea. Now imagine how many goods are ordered daily. And since important shipping routes cross through this area, China sees control over them as a form of regional and even global power. But wait, if Chinese ships already constantly pass through this route, why does China need to do anything else? The answer's simple: for insurance. In case of a major conflict, if China loses access to this trade route, it'll be a huge blow to the country's economy. That's why China's doing everything to increase its presence and control the waters no matter what happens. China depends too much on trade, so much so that access to the open ocean through the South China Sea is a matter of national survival. From China's point of view, there's a real possibility that at some point the country could be cut off from trade, so they need to act first. There's also a third reason why the South China Sea is so important for China: defense. The military bases that are being built on the new islands greatly improve early warning systems. After building the islands, China set up anti-ship and anti-aircraft missile platforms, placed combat jets on the islands, and it's quite a sight. Today, China controls 4 major outposts with 2-mile-long runways in the disputed areas of the South China Sea: Woody Island, Fiery Cross Reef, Mischief Reef, and Subi Reef. This place also holds other military assets like HQ-9 SAMs and YJ-12B anti-ship missiles, radar and communication equipment, as well as hangars capable of holding transport, patrol, and combat aircraft. The range of Chinese fighter jets, like the J-15, from these islands is theoretically quite large, but the key word here is theoretically. In practice, these combat aircraft can only operate effectively within the range of existing radar and sensor platforms. Without external radar coverage, situational awareness drops, and with it, effectiveness. That's why the islands and all the military equipment on them are of critical importance, and of course this escalates the tensions. Just think about it. China has fully militarized the islands, and of course that's been seen as an aggressive move, a threat to all the countries nearby. Well, at least that's what high-ranking U.S. military commander John C. Aquilino thinks. Despite the incidents I mentioned at the very beginning of the video, U.S. Navy planes ignore numerous warnings and openly continue their reconnaissance missions in the South China Sea. Once, because of this, a Chinese plane flew way too close to an American plane, making a dangerous maneuver in a disputed region. The American crew reminded the Chinese about the need to follow aviation safety rules, but in any case, it still feels like brandishing weapons at one another. Meanwhile, clashes between China and other countries vying for the sea continue, and many accuse Beijing of illegally invading their exclusive economic zones. In 2012, for example, Beijing took control of the Scarborough Reef in the Philippines economic zone after months of standoff involving armed ships. In October 2023, the Philippines removed several Chinese buoys that were preventing fishermen from actually fishing. And even earlier, in August, the Philippines accused China of dangerous maneuvers. This happened after the Chinese Coast Guard shot water cannons at Philippine boats. Vietnam isn't falling behind. It's built 21 structures on the Spratly Islands, the highest number to date, and it's in a conflict with China. This is what it looks like, with Vietnam's structures marked in green on the map and China's in blue, and no one plans to back down. But there must be some kind of solution, right? Well, the Philippines started an arbitration case against China at the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. The court ruled in favor of the Philippines, stating that the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea supersedes any historic rights or other sovereign rights or jurisdiction in excess of the limits imposed therein. In other words, the 9-dash line doesn't give China any grounds for claims. However, this decision doesn't bother Beijing much. It continued building islands and placing Coast Guard fishing boats and maritime police in disputed waters. It's as if they just ignored everything that was said. But I want to figure out why construction is happening exactly in those places. I mean, if China thinks all the South China Sea is theirs, they could build wherever they want, but they've picked certain areas. Look, the South China Sea covers an area of about 1,423,000 square miles with an average depth of 4,000 feet. There are, of course, much deeper places. For example, in the middle of the sea, the distance from the surface to the bottom can reach 18,240 feet. It's clear that building islands in this area wouldn't make sense, as it would take a huge amount of construction materials, which would make these islands absurdly expensive. That's why the chosen locations for construction are places where, first, the water's relatively shallow, and second, the resources for creating islands are fairly close. Such construction couldn't come without consequences, and I'm not even talking about the economy and politics. China turned 7 reefs of the Spratly Islands into artificial islands. 7 reefs. They used a special method which involves extracting coral from the core of the reef, grinding it up, and piling it together to create artificial land. It already sounds kind of wrong. Although dredging, land reclamation, and the construction of artificial islands are not unique to China, the scale, speed of construction, biodiversity of the area, and the significance of the Spratly Islands for the region's ecology make all of this particularly concerning. In addition to the damage to the reefs, China's activities have had a negative impact on fishing close to the reclamation sites and may have long-term effects on fishing throughout the entire sea. Not to mention that several reefs have been completely destroyed to serve as the foundation for new islands. This causes huge damage to the surrounding marine ecosystem, and all of this that's been built could wash back into the sea, forming plumes that could literally choke marine life. Plus, they could contain heavy metals, oil, and other chemicals, and that, well, let's just say it doesn't help the environment. The worst part is that poor construction and changes to the ecosystem might lead to instability in the man-made islands. Some experts believe that China built too quickly and on too large a scale for the result to be reliable. The rumor is, and this is basically all the info available to the public, that the concrete on the new islands is crumbling and their foundations are turning into sponges. Also, the fate of the islands is in question in case of a super typhoon. In November 2013, Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines and neighboring countries. It's considered one of the most powerful tropical cyclones in recorded history. Its wind speed reached a peak of 195 miles per hour, and the total number of fatalities exceeded 6,300 people. More than 1,000 went missing. This typhoon swept right over the spot where the new Chinese islands are today. And judging by how insanely powerful Haiyan was, those artificial islands could really be in trouble if something like that hits them. This could very well happen because the region as a whole is prone to typhoons, even not super ones. About 10 typhoons pass over the northwestern Pacific Ocean every year, reaching the shores of southern China, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And you know what helps tame the power of typhoons, shielding people and coastlines from the energy of the waves? Coral reefs. They act as a natural barrier, but China got rid of them to create islands that now seem completely defenseless against the elements. The biggest news from the past few days is that I forgot to tell you about one of my experiments. A couple of months back, I bought a CO2 sensor and started keeping the levels under 1,000 ppm indoors. And guess what? I stopped feeling tired, distracted, sleepy, and all those other things that a lot of you probably experience. Long story short, I recommend taking a look at that if you have the same problems. And if you can't be bothered to figure it all out, here's the short version. You can just air out the room you're in, working or sleeping as often and as thoroughly as possible. Victims of quarrels. In August 2024, something happened that can't exactly be called surprising or unexpected. China and the Philippines, let's say, had a falling out. And yes, it was once again over the South China Sea. Vessels from both countries collided in shallow waters near the Spratly Archipelago, where the two nations had been trying to ease tensions. The Chinese Coast Guard claimed that the Philippine vessels, there were two of them, intentionally crashed into a Chinese ship. Basically, China put all the blame on its neighbors. What did the Philippines say about this? Naturally, the country's authorities reject China's version of the incident at sea. According to statements from the capital, two Filipino vessels, BRP Bagakay and BRP Cape Engano, faced illegal and aggressive actions from Chinese Coast Guard ships. A hole about 5 inches in diameter formed on the deck of the BRP Cape Engano, while the second vessel also sustained minor structural damage. All of this happened during a mission to deliver supplies to Patag and Lawak Islands, where Philippine troops are stationed. It's really hard to figure out who's actually at fault in this situation. You could try using video or photo evidence, but even that's not so simple. The photos released by the Philippine Coast Guard show damage to the BRP Bagakay, which kinda makes it look like the Chinese side was the one who attacked. In response, the Chinese Coast Guard posted a video where, according to them, you can see the Philippine ship colliding with the Chinese vessel. Bottom line, there's just no way to clear this up. Naval drills. And while tensions around the islands in the South China Sea are rising, the Philippines are holding drills. In 2024, the country, with support from the U.S. and some other nations, practiced battle strategies on the water and also tested the combat readiness of its ships, just in case. Besides the U.S., Canada, Japan, as well as representatives from the U.K. and Australia took part in the drills. Initially, the Philippines planned to involve only the U.S., but then it grew into a multinational event. And I think the Philippines were more than happy with that. The training program included complex tasks for the Navy, including operations with distant targets, drills for countering unmanned aerial vehicles, and joint actions of Allied ships in searching for submarines. The exercises also involved refueling at sea and search and rescue operations. If you had to sum up everything that happened, the Philippines expanded their training scope and improved cooperation with Allied countries. As for the ships, the Philippine Navy is actively updating its fleet, introducing advanced naval equipment. This, as you can probably guess, is due to the tensions in the South China Sea, so they always need to be ready. Buying new ships and equipping them with the latest tech is definitely a plus, but there's a downside. The country's fleet is still getting the hang of modern naval combat tactics. Before the modernization program started in 2012, the military fleet was mainly made up of ships from World War II. The Philippines definitely has room to grow, but with so many allies, that probably won't be an issue. Vietnam versus China. Check this out. 4 years ago, this place was an uninhabited atoll, but today it's home to the largest military base in the South China Sea area. Think it's just another Chinese project? Nope, this time it's Vietnam who's stepping in. In early 2024, Vietnam sped up the work on expanding the islands and draining areas in the disputed region. Naturally, this is a response to China's increasing activity. Since 2021, Vietnam has been actively expanding its presence on the Spratly Islands. If everything goes according to plan, more than 990 acres of artificial land will be created there. Such large-scale changes to the archipelago's landscape haven't been seen since China began its island-building efforts. Over the past 3 years, Vietnam has increased its area on the Spratly Islands by 10 times, which is definitely impressive. In the Spratly Islands area, powerful dredgers were actively used to dig navigation channels and create harbors. Vietnam's also been building defensive structures like walls where artillery can be placed. And all of this is done for one simple reason. Vietnam just wants to protect itself from potential conflicts, and the islands are a great solution. Especially if they plan to militarize them later on. Did you remember to hit the like button? See you later.